Humanity had always been a curious species, pushing the boundaries of knowledge, venturing into the unknown, and looking to the stars with dreams of discovery. For centuries, Earth had been a solitary rock in the vast universe, unaware of the complex web of life and conflict swirling beyond its atmosphere. But now, that was about to change. It was supposed to be a moment of triumph, humanity's first contact with an intelligent alien race, the Zarnax, a species long known for their ruthless conquests and advanced technology. The first communication, a transmission of peace, had been carefully crafted by Earth's leaders, a message of goodwill. Humanity was eager to join the intergalactic community, to learn, to grow, to share. It was a bold step forward for a young civilization. But the Zarnax had other plans. The transmission arrived just days after the initial peaceful message. It was cold, impersonal, and dripping with disdain. The Zarnax didn't want peace. They didn't want cooperation. They wanted submission. "We are the Zarnax," the message read. "Your species is weak, untested, and insignificant. You are nothing more than a stepping stone for the next stage of our expansion. Submit now, and your survival will be guaranteed. Resist, and you will be annihilated. There is no room for mercy." The ultimatum was clear. The Zarnax had no interest in dialogue, no interest in diplomacy. They saw humanity as an obstacle, a species too dangerous to leave unchecked. Earth's leaders watched the transmission in silence, their faces grim, their fingers clenching the armrests of their chairs. But then, in the tense silence that followed, something unexpected happened. Humanity did not cower. They did not falter. They had faced adversity throughout their history, from wars to natural disasters to the struggle for survival. If the Zarnax wanted a fight, humanity was ready to give them one. The Global Council convened in an emergency meeting. Captain Sarah Ward, commander of Earth's first interstellar military fleet, stood before them. Her eyes, usually calm and measured, burned with resolve. She had served in countless military operations across the galaxy, but nothing prepared her for the moment that was coming. The war would be unlike anything they had faced before. "Tell the Zarnax," she said, her voice firm, "that humanity will never bow to anyone. We don't surrender. We fight. And we will win." The decision was unanimous. The Council released a counter-transmission, not begging for peace, but offering a direct message. "We don't surrender. We don't fear. Humanity will never kneel. We will fight to the last man, and we will make you regret underestimating us." It wasn't a declaration of war. Not yet. It was a promise. The Zarnax were wrong if they thought they could simply crush humanity. The humans had something the Zarnax couldn't understand, a fierce, unyielding spirit that could not be broken. If they wanted war, they would get it, but they would quickly learn that humanity didn't do mercy. As the transmission ended, the silence in the room was deafening. No one knew what would come next, but one thing was certain: the war had begun, and humanity would make sure the galaxy remembered who they were. The first salvo of the war came faster than anyone had anticipated. Days after Earth's defiant message, the Zarnax fleet descended upon one of humanity's outlying colonies, a small resource-rich planet known as Epsilon 3. The colony wasn't heavily fortified, a fact the Zarnax had likely factored in when they decided to make an example of it. They had underestimated humanity's capacity for resilience, assuming the first strike would cripple human morale. The message they sent with their attack was unmistakable. "This is your fate if you resist." Captain Sarah Ward watched from the command deck of the human fleet as her eyes darted over tactical screens, scanning the fleet's readiness. The Zarnax were sending a full assault, a deadly armada of battle cruisers and warships. They had no intention of holding back, no expectation of facing a meaningful challenge. But Sarah Ward was not about to let the first attack define humanity's future. "Prepare for launch," she ordered, her voice calm but tinged with a quiet fury. Her team, battle-hardened from their earlier training, moved in synchronized precision. The human fleet, consisting of just a dozen ships, barely enough to make a dent in the Zarnax armada, had been hastily retrofitted with experimental technology. Earth wasn't a dominant force in space, but they had their ingenuity, their unpredictability, and above all, their will to fight. The ships shot out of their hangars, small compared to the Zarnax behemoths, but they were fast and nimble, designed for hit-and-run tactics. The humans weren't going to win this battle in sheer numbers. They would need to outthink their enemies. Engage, Captain Ward barked as the battle began. Human ships weaved in and out of the Zarnax lines, dodging heavy artillery blasts and launching quick strikes. Each maneuver was calculated, each shot fired with deadly precision. The Zarnax ships, overconfident and arrogant, found themselves scrambling to react. The humans had prepared, anticipating the enemy's tactics and weaknesses. They'd studied Zarnax technology, learned their battle patterns, and adapted in ways the Zarnax had not expected. One of the experimental human ships, the Vanguard, led the charge. Its sleek form darted through the chaos, zigzagging past enemy fire and launching a barrage of energy missiles at a Zarnax warship. The explosion sent shockwaves through the Zarnax fleet, tearing apart the larger vessel. For a moment, it seemed like the tide might actually shift in humanity's favor. But the Zarnax were far from defeated. They retaliated with overwhelming force. One by one, human ships were struck down, their engines trailing smoke as they struggled to stay operational. Sarah Ward's heart clenched as she watched one of her closest friends, Commander Jason Holt, order a retreat from his damaged vessel, only to be caught by a Zarnax warship and destroyed in a brilliant burst of flames. It was a bitter taste of the price humanity would pay. Yet, even in the face of such destruction, Sarah didn't lose her resolve. "We're not done yet," she muttered, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Keep fighting." Despite the mounting casualties, humanity's strategy wasn't about winning this engagement. It was about survival. Every Zarnax ship destroyed, every shot fired in retaliation, was a lesson learned. Each small victory was a message to the Zarnax. Humanity wasn't going to go down quietly. As the battle wore on, the Zarnax began to regroup. They had underestimated the humans, but now they were coming at full force, determined to end the rebellion before it could spread. Yet Sarah Ward knew one thing. The humans had given them something to think about. The Zarnax might have had the upper hand in sheer strength, but they had no idea what they were truly dealing with. "We may not win this battle," she said quietly to her crew, "but we've sent them a message. They'll remember who we are." As the last of the human ships limped away, battered but not broken, the Zarnax were left to survey the damage. They had failed to crush humanity in one fell swoop, as they had hoped. And now, they knew, Earth wasn't just a colony. It was a force to be reckoned with. The Zarnax were relentless. After their failure to quickly crush humanity at Epsilon 3, they intensified their attacks. Humanity's response, however, was unlike anything the Zarnax had ever anticipated. The first battle had shown the universe that humanity was more than just a weak, fledgling species. It was a force capable of adapting, learning, and surviving. Earth's leaders, now aware that the war had become inevitable, rallied humanity like never before. The war was no longer just about defending colonies or fighting for resources. It was about survival. It was about proving to the galaxy that humanity would not be silenced or enslaved. Captain Sarah Ward stood at the helm of humanity's counteroffensive, her face etched with determination. The loss of Commander Holt weighed heavily on her mind, but the fire in her heart burned brighter than ever. She knew that her crew and every soldier under her command were counting on her leadership, and they would not let her down. Across the galaxy, humanity's forces began to grow. The first battle had sparked something within the human race, an undeniable fury, an unshakable belief that they would never go quietly into the night. Resistance groups popped up in the most unlikely of places. Every day, more human ships entered the fight, often piloted by those with no formal military training, but who had been galvanized by the same indomitable will to survive. The human fleet, though outmatched in numbers, began to capitalize on the Zarnax's arrogance. The Zarnax believed they could easily wipe out any resistance with sheer firepower. But humanity had something the Zarnax could never have predicted: an innate ability to turn every disadvantage into an advantage. The humans weren't confined to the rules of conventional warfare. They didn't play by the same playbook as their alien invaders. In a daring mission, Captain Ward and her fleet launched a surprise attack on a Zarnax convoy transporting vital resources. The convoy, consisting of heavily armored ships, was considered a low-risk target by the Zarnax, until the humans struck. With Lieutenant John Carter's ingenuity, the human fleet infiltrated the convoy undetected. They disabled Zarnax communications, cutting off their ability to call for reinforcements. In the ensuing chaos, Sarah Ward's ships decimated the convoy. The operation was a resounding success, strategically brilliant, and a resounding blow to the Zarnax supply lines. Yet, even as humanity tasted its first real victory, the toll of war was becoming more evident. The human casualties were mounting, and the psychological scars were beginning to show. The war was no longer just about strategy and firepower. It was about survival, about hope, and about keeping the spark of resistance alive in the face of insurmountable odds. At a war council, Sarah stood before a screen displaying the current status of the human fleet. Ships that had once been stationed as simple defense vessels were now out on the front lines, risking everything. Crews were stretched thin, and morale was fluctuating. The Zarnax were a formidable enemy, merciless, intelligent, and well-organized. "Do we have enough time to prepare for another engagement?" asked Admiral Patel, one of humanity's most respected leaders. His eyes were tired, but his voice was steady. Sarah looked at the screen, her gaze unwavering. "We have time. But more importantly, we have the will. We'll fight them where they least expect it, and we'll make them regret ever underestimating humanity." As the war dragged on, each victory, no matter how small, became a symbol. Humanity wasn't just fighting back, it was pushing forward. In secret war rooms and hidden bunkers, resistance movements spread like wildfire, not only in the colonies but also on alien worlds, where humanity had begun to plant the seeds of a new kind of revolution. The Zarnax might have thought they could erase humanity from existence, but they had sparked a fire that would burn brighter with every passing day. The war was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. But one thing was clear: humanity had found its fighting spirit. The Zarnax had awakened something in them, and now it was too late for the invaders to turn back. The war had dragged on for months. Humanity's resolve had been tested time and time again, but they had proved themselves capable of more than mere survival. They had become a force to be reckoned with, a thorn in the side of the Zarnax, and their fierce resistance had drawn the attention of more than just the invaders. In the depths of Earth's most secure research facility, Dr. Evelyn Voss stood before a massive holoscreen, her mind racing as she examined the data. For months, she and a team of scientists had been working tirelessly to unlock the secrets of the Zarnax technology they had managed to capture during the earlier skirmishes. What they had uncovered so far was staggering. Hidden within the alien wreckage were blueprints for weapons far beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of. Energy shields that could withstand the fiercest of assaults, propulsion systems capable of bending the very fabric of space, and most terrifyingly, a device capable of altering gravitational fields. At first, humanity had viewed these discoveries as mere scraps, a technological oddity. But as the war intensified, it became clear that this was no mere stroke of luck. Earth had stumbled upon a weapon, one that could shift the balance of power in their favor. If they could harness it, they could turn the tide against the Zarnax. Dr. Voss was about to make that leap. "There's a risk," she muttered to herself, adjusting the final parameters of the device. The gravitational manipulator was powerful but unstable. It had the potential to tear apart space itself if misused, but in the hands of humanity, It might just be the key to defeating the Zarnax. Are we ready? Sarah Ward's voice came through the comms, sharp and unwavering as ever. We're ready, Captain, Dr. Voss replied, her fingers shaking slightly as she activated the final sequence. The lab hummed with energy, and the room filled with a low, pulsing vibration. The hidden weapon was active. We've adapted the tech to our ships. It will disrupt the Zarnax fleet's gravity drives, rendering them slow and vulnerable. Ward's voice crackled over the line again, and Sarah's face appeared on the monitor. Good. Let's see if it works. It was a plan born from desperation, a plan that could change the outcome of the war, or end it for everyone. They would need to hit the Zarnax where it hurt the most. Their heavily fortified flagship, the Scourge, the flagship that had led every assault on human colonies. If they could disable it, they could cripple the Zarnax command structure, and perhaps even force them to negotiate. Ward gave the order, and humanity's fleet, now significantly bolstered with new ships and technology, launched into deep space. Their target was the heart of the Zarnax invasion force. It was a suicide mission for many, but for Sarah and her crew, there was no choice but to fight. The stakes had never been higher. The fleet moved quickly, weaving through the darkness of space with deadly intent. They were moving closer to the Scourge, but the Zarnax were ready. They had sensed something was off, and now Zarnax ships were converging on their position in full force. The battle began before they even had a chance to execute their plan. Initiate the gravity disruptor, Ward ordered, her voice calm as ever. Now, on cue, the new weapon activated, and space itself seemed to shift. Gravity wells fluctuated around the Zarnax fleet, and their ships slowed, caught in the destabilizing field. The once unstoppable warships now seemed sluggish, easy targets for the agile human fleet. The human ships attacked with ruthless precision, striking at the vulnerable alien vessels. Yet the Zarnax were not defeated so easily. Their warships retaliated fiercely, launching massive counterattacks. But now, they were fighting at a disadvantage. The Zarnax, masters of space combat, found themselves struggling to keep up as their ships were crippled, forced into unpredictable trajectories by the unstable gravity fields. Lock in on the Scourge, Captain Ward barked. Take it down. Human ships concentrated their fire on the Zarnax flagship, targeting its weak points. The Scourge, the pride of the Zarnax fleet, now found itself a sitting target. It wasn't long before explosions ripped through the vessel's hull, and the once mighty flagship began to fall apart under the onslaught. As the Scourge began to break apart, humanity's fleet gave one final push. The Zarnax had underestimated Earth's willpower, and now they were paying the price. The fight was far from over, but the first true blow had been struck. The gravity disruptor had worked beyond expectations, but the consequences of its use were far from clear. There were risks, and as the humans surveyed the wreckage of the Zarnax flagship, they knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger conflict. But one thing was certain: humanity had just gained the upper hand, and the Zarnax would never again see Earth as an easy target. The aftermath of the destruction of the Scourge reverberated throughout the galaxy. Humanity's unexpected success had sent shockwaves through the Zarnax Empire. The loss of their flagship, their symbol of dominance, was a blow that they could not easily recover from. Their command structure was fractured, and the morale of their fleet wavered for the first time in the war. But victory, as sweet as it seemed, came with its own price. The human fleet, though victorious in battle, had sustained heavy damage. The gravity disruptor, while effective, had drained the energy reserves of many of their ships, leaving them vulnerable. The once precise and agile fleet was now battered and bruised, limping back to Earth's last remaining stronghold, the colony of Elysium. The colony, once considered a secondary defense point, had now become Earth's lifeline. Captain Sarah Ward stood on the command deck of the flagship, the Indomitable, her eyes scanning the screen that displayed the condition of their fleet. The once pristine ships were now streaked with burn marks and signs of wear, their hulls showing the scars of battle. She took a deep breath, her gaze hardening as she realized how much they had sacrificed. "Status report," she called out. Lieutenant Carter, the ship's tactical officer, glanced at his console before responding. "We've lost 3 ships, Captain. Another 6 are critically damaged. We'll be able to make it to Elysium, but it will take time. We'll need to repair, rearm, and regroup before we can launch another strike." Sarah nodded, her mind working through the possibilities. They could rebuild, but only if they had time, and time was something they didn't have. "Do we have any word from the colonies?" she asked. Carter hesitated before answering. "The outer colonies are reporting in. The Zarnax are regrouping, but they're not retreating. We've disrupted their command, but they've mobilized every ship they have left. They're planning a counterattack. Elysium is next in their sights." The news hit Sarah like a hammer. Elysium had already been under threat for weeks, but now it was clear. The Zarnax would come for it with everything they had. The humans could not afford to lose it. Not now. If they fell back to Elysium, and it was destroyed, humanity's hope for survival would diminish. Sarah's fingers gripped the edge of the console as she fought the urge to pace. "What are the odds that we can hold Elysium?" "We're outnumbered, Captain. Even with the reinforcements from Earth, the Zarnax fleet is still much larger," Carter replied. "But we can't run. Not anymore." Sarah's voice was firm, resolute. "Prepare the fleet for another battle. If the Zarnax want Elysium, they're going to have to go through us." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Every ship in the fleet, no matter how damaged, was prepared for the defense of Elysium. The crew worked tirelessly, patching up systems, reloading weapons, and re-establishing communication lines. They were battered, exhausted, but they were not done. Sarah walked among the crew, offering words of encouragement to those who were too worn out to speak. She knew the battle ahead would be their toughest yet, but she refused to let doubt take root. If humanity could hold Elysium, they could hold on to hope. And if they could hold on to hope, they could win this war. As the fleet gathered in orbit around Elysium, the full might of the Zarnax appeared in the distance. A massive armada, their ships a blight on the stars, blocking out the light. The time had come for the final stand. "They're coming," Carter said, his voice strained as he observed the enemy's approach. Sarah stood tall, her gaze focused on the horizon. "We fight. We fight until they realize just how much they've underestimated us." But in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered, "Can we hold them off long enough?" She pushed the thought away. She couldn't afford to think like that. Not now. Not when so many had already given so much. The Zarnax were about to make their move, and humanity would make them regret ever crossing paths with Earth. The silence of space was shattered by the roar of engines as humanity's battered fleet prepared for the coming storm. Elysium's atmosphere, once a symbol of hope and peace, now trembled under the shadow of the approaching Zarnax armada. Captain Sarah Ward stood in front of the tactical display, her eyes scanning the incoming enemy ships. The Zarnax were closing in, their ships massive and menacing, dwarfing humanity's fleet. The odds were insurmountable, but they had no choice but to fight. "Captain," Lieutenant Carter's voice broke through her thoughts. "We've got the Zarnax coming in hot. We'll be outnumbered 5-1 once they hit orbit. We've got no reinforcements left." Sarah took a deep breath. She had led her crew through impossible odds before, but this battle would be different. If they lost Elysium, humanity's resistance would be crushed. The last hope for survival would be extinguished. There was no running now. "We fight," she said, her voice steady but filled with an undeniable fire. "We fight until we've got nothing left. Let's show them what happens when they try to conquer humanity." With a resolute nod, Carter relayed her orders to the fleet. The engines of the human ships roared to life as they formed up, creating a defensive perimeter around Elysium. The Zarnax were closing in fast, their massive ships looming larger by the second. Each human vessel, despite its damages, maneuvered into position with an almost synchronized precision. "We're not just defending Elysium," Sarah continued, pacing in front of her crew. "We're defending every colony, every human alive out there. This isn't just about us. It's about the future, and we will not let them take it." Her words rallied the crew, and across the fleet, humanity's soldiers and officers prepared for the clash. They might have been outgunned, but they had something the Zarnax could never understand: resolve. They had something the Zarnax had never encountered before. The first wave of Zarnax ships broke through the outer edge of Elysium's defense grid, sending shockwaves through space. The massive warships opened fire, their plasma cannons blasting through the void. The first few blasts were so intense that they momentarily overwhelmed the human shields, but the human fleet held fast. "Return fire," Sarah barked. "Target their engines. Take out their mobility. Don't give them room to maneuver." Human ships fired in response, precision targeting the Zarnax ships' vulnerable points. The battle raged in the cold vacuum of space, a chaotic dance of energy beams and explosions. The Zarnax retaliated with brutal force, their weapons cutting through human ships with deadly accuracy. Yet, for every Zarnax warship that fell, another human vessel joined the fray, striking back with relentless fury. "Elysium's shields are down to 30%, Carter reported. "We need to push them back, or we won't be able to hold the planet." "We'll hold," Sarah said, though doubt tugged at the edge of her voice. The Zarnax were relentless, but so were the humans. "Give everything we've got. Launch the reserve drones. We need to distract their main forces." The reserve drones, small but agile, were released from the hangars. These drones were equipped with explosive charges designed to make a dent in the Zarnax ships. They didn't stand a chance against the larger vessels, but their presence was enough to create chaos, throwing off the Zarnax targeting systems and creating openings for the human fleet to exploit. As the battle wore on, Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. The human fleet was holding strong, but each moment that passed seemed to stretch out longer than the last. The Zarnax kept coming, wave after wave, showing no sign of letting up. The fight was beginning to feel like an endless, brutal endurance test. For every human victory, the Zarnax retaliated with overwhelming force. But in the chaos, there was a flicker of hope. The Zarnax flagship, the Dominion, had made a move toward Elysium's surface, likely attempting to disable the planet's defenses directly. "Target the Dominion's engine core," Sarah ordered, a dangerous edge to her voice. "All ships, focus your fire on that vessel. We cannot let them take Elysium." In the heart of the storm, humanity's ships concentrated their firepower, blasting the Dominion with everything they had left. The mighty flagship shuddered under the barrage, its shields failing. For a brief moment, the tides of the battle shifted. The Dominion, the symbol of the Zarnax's strength, began to break apart. But just as victory seemed within reach, the Zarnax revealed their final trump card. A massive energy pulse, stronger than anything humanity had faced before, shot out from the Dominion's collapsing core. The pulse threatened to overwhelm the human fleet and disable their shields entirely. "Brace for impact," Ward shouted as the pulse expanded, sending shockwaves through space. The human fleet trembled, and the ships groaned under the pressure. But humanity didn't flinch. They would not let this be the end. The energy pulse from the Zarnax Dominion ripped through the fabric of space like a thunderclap, shaking humanity's fleet to its core. For a brief moment, every ship felt as though it might be torn apart. The tremors reverberated through the hulls of the human vessels, rattling every crew member to their bones. Shields flared, sputtered, and in many cases, collapsed entirely. For a heartbeat, it seemed like victory might slip out of their grasp. "Damage report." Captain Sarah Ward's voice cut through the chaos, steel in her tone. "Shields are down across the fleet," Carter replied, grimacing as he watched his screens. "Engines are destabilizing on several ships. We're down to half our combat capability. Captain." Sarah's mind raced, calculating the odds. The Zarnax had thrown everything they had at Elysium, but humanity had held the line. It wasn't enough yet. The Dominion was still operational, and the Zarnax still controlled the momentum. They would not have time to recover if the enemy pressed forward. "Are the drones still functional?" she asked. "Some are operational, but most are severely damaged," Carter answered. "We'll be able to launch a few more, but it's all we've got." Sarah looked out at the stars beyond the bridge, watching the destructive light of the battle rage. The Zarnax were closing in on the final assault, but they didn't understand what it meant to face humanity when they had nothing left to lose. "We don't need drones," Sarah said, her voice low but filled with unyielding resolve. "We need to show them the power of human will. Set the course for a direct assault on the Dominion. We're going in." There was a brief silence on the bridge. Everyone knew that it was a desperate move, one that would likely mean certain death for the ships involved. But in that silence, something shifted. The crew, battered and bruised, understood what Sarah meant. This was the last stand. "Ready the remaining ships," Sarah ordered. "We won't wait for their next move. We'll make them regret this decision." As the remaining ships of humanity's fleet slowly maneuvered into position, Sarah glanced at the faces around her. Every officer, every soldier knew that this was no longer just a battle. It was their final opportunity to drive the Zarnax out of the human home system. The battle for Elysium was no longer about defending a colony. It was about humanity's very survival. On the view screen, the Zarnax Dominion loomed like a dark titan in the distance, its massive form edging ever closer to Elysium's atmosphere. The Zarnax had begun their final push, confident that the last remnants of humanity's resistance would crumble under their assault. They had no idea what they were about to face. "Get us as close as you can," Sarah ordered, her jaw set. "We need to hit them before they hit Elysium. Now or never." Lieutenant Carter nodded, his fingers flying across the console. "Aye, Captain. We're on course. All remaining ships are locking onto the Dominion." "Captain, incoming fire," shouted Ensign Matthews, his voice sharp with urgency. Sarah's eyes narrowed as the first salvo of Zarnax fire exploded in the space around them. The human ships barely dodged the lethal beams, weaving and banking as they made their way toward the Dominion. It was a reckless maneuver, one that left them exposed. But they had no choice. They had to get within striking distance of the Zarnax flagship. "Hold course," Sarah barked. "We can't stop now." Her words echoed over the bridge, and the crew held their breath as the human ships streaked toward the Dominion. The Zarnax responded with fire, but the humans were too fast, too determined. They danced around the incoming blasts, their ships narrowly avoiding destruction as they pressed forward. The human fleet reached the Dominion. The flagship loomed ominously, a towering presence in the void. The Zarnax ships began to move into a defensive formation around it, but it was too late. The human fleet had already positioned itself for a final assault. "Fire everything," Sarah shouted, her voice a command born from pure desperation. The human ships released every remaining weapon at their disposal: torpedoes, energy blasts, missiles, anything they could throw at the Dominion. The flagship shuddered under the onslaught, the force of the attack too much for even its heavily armored hull. Sparks flew from the enemy vessel as it reeled under the pressure, struggling to maintain its position. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though the tide might be turning. But the Zarnax weren't about to go down so easily. The Dominion's weapons flared up, and with a massive explosion of energy, the flagship unleashed a final devastating wave of fire that sent shockwaves throughout the human fleet. "Brace for impact," Carter shouted as the pulse from the Dominion's weapons tore through space, ripping apart several human ships in its path. The Indomitable rocked violently under the blast, but Sarah held fast, gripping the edge of the console as she gave her final orders. "We will not surrender. We will not back down," she shouted, her voice unwavering as she stared at the flaming wreckage of their fleet. "Keep fighting. Keep pushing." The battle for Elysium raged on, and the human fleet was barely holding on. The Indomitable and its remaining ships had taken hit after hit, and the Dominion's weapons had left them with little more than scraps. The energy pulse from the Zarnak's flagship had torn through space like a cosmic hurricane, destroying the weaker ships in its path and leaving humanity's forces in disarray. But in the chaos of it all, something unexpected happened. A roar of triumph cut through the silence on the bridge of the Indomitable. Lieutenant Carter turned from his station, his face a mask of disbelief. "Captain, the Dominion. It's falling," he stammered. Sarah's eyes widened in shock as she peered at the screen. The mighty Zarnak's flagship, the vessel that had been the symbol of their war machine, was now engulfed in flames. A chain reaction of explosions was tearing through its interior, the massive ship buckling under the weight of its own destruction. "What happened?" Sarah demanded. "The concentrated fire we hit it with," Carter replied. "It finally reached the core systems. There's no coming back from it." The Dominion was collapsing in real time, its vast frame shuddering under the tremendous pressure. The Zarnak's fleet, momentarily thrown into disarray, began to scatter. Without their flagship, the Zarnaks had lost their leadership, and with it, their coordination. The remaining ships, now leaderless, tried to regroup, but it was too late. The tide of the battle had shifted. Sarah's mind raced. This was it. The Zarnaks, powerful and relentless, had been defeated, but at an enormous cost. The human fleet was in tatters, the survivors barely hanging on. Their shields were down, engines malfunctioning, and many ships were nothing more than floating wrecks. Yet, despite the heavy losses, humanity had done what no one thought possible. They had struck at the heart of the Zarnak's empire, and survived. "Prepare for a final push," Sarah said, her voice now filled with a quiet but determined strength. "We can finish this. We'll force the Zarnaks into retreat." The remaining human ships, battered but not broken, surged forward. With the Dominion's destruction, the remaining Zarnak ships hesitated, lost without their flagship to guide them. They were no longer the unstoppable force they once were. The human ships attacked with renewed ferocity, pushing through the remaining Zarnak's defenses with all the might they could muster. Sarah's eyes never left the screen. She could see the enemy ships faltering, many of them attempting to flee or scatter into the far reaches of space. But it was too late. The human fleet had already surrounded them, and the remnants of the Zarnak's force found themselves outmatched. A few scattered pockets of resistance remained, but the human fleet had regained the upper hand. "This is it," Sarah whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "This is our victory." One by one, the remaining Zarnak ships were disabled, their energy cores overloaded by the sheer force of humanity's determination. The fight for Elysium was all but over. The Zarnaks were in retreat, and humanity had won, against all odds. The sounds of victory rang through the bridge as humanity's fleet poured everything they had into finishing off the last of the invaders. Explosions filled the void as Zarnak ships fell, their once proud war machines now nothing more than smoldering debris. The battle had been long, brutal, and costly, but humanity had held strong. And now, the Zarnak's empire had been forced to acknowledge the true power of Earth's defenders. As the final Zarnak ship disintegrated, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet relief. Elysium was safe. Earth had held its ground. The war was over. The galaxy would never forget the tenacity of humanity. "We did it," Carter breathed, looking around at the crew, their faces a mix of exhaustion and triumph. Sarah turned to face him, a faint smile crossing her face. "We didn't just survive, Carter. We showed them that we fight, until the very end." Humanity had not only survived the war, they had proven themselves an indomitable force in the universe. The Zarnaks had come to conquer Earth, but they had underestimated the power of the human spirit. Earth had fought back, and they had won. As Sarah stood on the bridge, looking out at the stars, she knew this was just the beginning. The Zarnaks were not the last threat humanity would face. But no matter what came next, Earth would face it together, with the same unyielding resolve that had carried them through this war. A new dawn had broken over Elysium. And for humanity, the future had never looked brighter.